and welcome to Weekly News Highlights. Let's begin with key words that made headlines this week. South Korea's new president, Lee Jae-myung, has held phone talks with leaders from the U.S., China, and Japan. He's also scheduled to attend the G7 summit in Canada, making it his first official overseas trip since taking office. The South Korean military has, starting Wednesday, halted loudspeaker broadcasts against the north in border areas. And North Korea appears to have also turned off its own speakers as well, after blaring loud, eerie noises toward the south for the past 5 months. K-pop supergroup BTS nears a reunion as 4 members finished their military service this week. 6 of BTS' 7 members have completed their mandatory military, with the last remaining member to be released from his duties later this month. Now, one of the key tasks for this new Lee Jae-myung administration is to pass a supplementary budget to fight the ongoing economic hardships. This also aligns with Lee's first priority of reviving the economy, especially through the government's budget. What do we know so far, and what does it need to look like? Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
민생 회복과 경제 살리기부터 시작하겠습니다. 불황과 일전을 치른다는 각오로 비상경제 대응 TF를 곧바로 지금 즉시 가동하겠습니다. 국가 재정을 마중물로 삼아 경제 선순환을 되살리겠습니다.
As President Lee Jae-myung started his term right after winning the election on June 4th, he picked the economy as his #1 priority. He in fact kicked the task force off as his first executive order, has called 2 meetings so far. This comes against a backdrop of South Korea's economy struggling, with the Korea Development Institute labeling the current situation subdued. For the first quarter, the nation's economy shrank. The country's gross domestic product from January to March shrank by 0.2% on quarter, unchanged from an estimate in April. During the second meeting, the first thing he ordered the task force to look into was a supplementary budget. Plus, President Lee has the backing of the parliament, with the ruling Democratic Party holding the majority to pass, with DP lawmakers calling for at least 20 trillion Korean won or $14.5 billion US.
We'll introduce a supplementary budget to ease the burden on people's daily lives and deliver policies that make a real difference. At the same time, we won't stop investing in South Korea's future.
While the specifics are yet to come out, one thing to look out for is the distribution of cash. Lee has been pushing for a universal payment of 250,000 won to everyone. This is something that could help certain industries, especially with hotels and restaurant businesses struggling due to weakened spending.
Providing payments in the form of local currency can help boost the regional economy. So we could see a temporary increase in spending, particularly in sectors like services, lodging, and dining, which may lead to a slight uptick in employment.
Meanwhile, taking on prices is another issue. Universal payments could raise concerns over inflation. On the other hand, the Bank of Korea has actually backed the supplementary budget, and it wouldn't affect the inflation too much. In fact, the BOK says a speedy one is necessary. Another expert also said the supplementary budget needs to focus on the construction sector to support the national economy.
In construction, every 1 billion won in revenue creates around 12 jobs. It's an industry where working class people, those who rely on labor to make a living, benefit the most.
In addition, there needs to be investments made to make sure industries struggling from U.S. tariffs can survive the hard times. This includes steel and automakers. Plus, sectors like AI need consistent development, and funds could be used to make sure the nation's strategic industry don't lag behind. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
After the South Korean military halted loudspeaker broadcasts against the north, North Korea appears to have turned off its own speakers near the border as well. Our Kim Bo-kyung reports.
North Korea's first response to the new South Korean administration's move has been to mutually reduce tensions. Pyongyang appears to have paused its broadcasts of loud noises towards South Korea on Thursday, following South Korea's suspension of loudspeaker messages the day before. According to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the South Korean military has not detected any broadcasts since late last night, though it needs to see if the pause will continue.
There are no areas where we can currently hear the broadcast, though it stopped late last night, and there were certainly no broadcasts early this morning or at dawn. It is uncertain whether this will continue in the afternoon. We're keeping a close eye on the situation.
This follows the South Korean military's move to halt loudspeaker broadcasts against the North in border areas the day before, in accordance with President Lee's order.
President Lee Jae-myung recently made this decision as a proactive measure to ease tensions, given the absence of any significant provocations from North Korea. This action is aimed at elevating the military standoff between the two Koreas and opening the way for restoring mutual trust.
The halt came for the first time in a year since the former administration resumed the broadcast last June, for the first time in 6 years, in response to North Korea flying trash-filled balloons across the border. For now, the JC has said there are no changes to scheduled plans to conduct training in border areas. With the first step taken to allay inter-Korean tensions, eyes are on whether this could serve as a momentum for President Lee to push his presidential campaign pledge, reversing the full suspension of the September 19th inter-Korean military agreement. An expert says it won't be easy to do it quickly.
If things develop further, the restoration of inter-Korean communication and liaison channels could pave the way for dialogue. However, I believe there are still many obstacles to fully restoring the September 19 military agreement.
As restoring the agreement is something that cannot be done unilaterally or preemptively, the expert added it should be pushed forward in a planned manner. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
With the country's new leader elected, South Korea has resumed top-level diplomacy. President Lee Jae-myung held a series of phone talks with foreign leaders this week and is slated to attend the G7 summit. For more on this, we have our correspondent Kim Bo-kyung in the studio with us. Bo-kyung, welcome.
Thank you, Eunji, for having me.
So, Bo-kyung, why don't we start with the phone calls President Lee has recently made with foreign leaders?
Sure. President Lee held a series of phone talks with foreign leaders. U.S. President Donald Trump on the 6th, Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba this Monday, and China's President Xi Jinping the next day. Lee is said to have had a friendly talk with Trump where they affirmed the importance of the ROK-US alliance and agreed to strive toward reaching a mutually satisfactory agreement in terms of tariff negotiations as soon as possible. 4 days later, the U.S. State Department confirmed the phone call between the two leaders, with the spokesperson saying that Washington is confident that the two countries' alliance will continue to thrive under the new South Korean president's leadership. In terms of a call with Ishiba, they agreed to build a stronger, more mature bilateral relationship and further affirmed their commitment to trilateral cooperation with the U.S. Regarding President Lee having phone talks with the U.S. and Japan before China, an expert said Lee is just keeping a promise made before he became president.
President Lee, during his presidential campaign, said that ROK-US alliance is the most top priority, and then he also put lots of emphasis on the relationship with Japan. Of course, he mentioned that South Korea and Japan, the trilateral cooperation is important. So he's simply implement what he has pledged.
Now with Chinese President Xi, he asked China to play a constructive role in the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and invited him to attend the APEC summit that will take place here in Korea in November. There were also talks with the Czech Prime Minister where both leaders welcomed the signing of the final contract for the construction of the two new nuclear power plants in Dukovany, calling it a cornerstone for further expanding economic cooperation. And more recently, he agreed to bolster strategic cooperation in the field of high-speed railways and nuclear power plants in talks with Vietnam's president and pledged to strengthen cooperation in national defense, clean energy, and critical minerals with the Australian Prime Minister.
I see. And President Lee will now be traveling to Canada to attend the G7 summit. And this will be his debut on the global diplomatic stage, right?
That's right, NG. His trip to the G7 summit comes less than 2 weeks since his inauguration. The summit is going to be in Alberta, and he is going there at Canada's invitation. He attending a G7 summit is going to be quite symbolic for South Korea, as it signals the resumption of Korea's top-level diplomacy that had been stalled over the past 6 months following the martial law crisis.
The attendance basically means that we are going to normalise things and actively engage on the diplomatic stage, though we have had a diplomatic vacuum for the past 6 months.
Now, with President Trump also set to attend the G7 summit in Canada, is there any possibility that President Lee might sit down for talks with Trump?
Yes, there's always a possibility, and if they get a chance to see each other, it is going to be the first in 7 months since the two leaders of the countries have last met in person. Previously, former President Yoon Suk-yeol and former U.S. President Joe Biden met at the APEC summit held in Peru in November last year. But we need to note that the G7 summit is a multilateral setting and that South Korea has been invited as an observer. In this kind of setting, it could be quite difficult to have bilateral talks. Also, according to an expert I spoke to, it could be better to talk about such challenging issues later on after being fully prepared and when proper talks can be held.
It's not a good idea that we will talk about these very upcoming and very daunting issues and challenges for South Korea, including tariff or cost sharing. And we have to be prepared. We have to have our own the strategy first, and then we will have a very detailed way to prepare the whole this meeting.
I see. And how about Japan? If bilateral talks do take place, how would they be?
Right, as Lee and Ishiba have already expressed their hopes to see each other in person during their recent phone talks, there's also a possibility of them meeting each other. In terms of Japan, there are still concerns over how President Lee will shape his approach toward Tokyo, as he had taken a confrontational stance regarding historical and territorial disputes. Despite such worries, an expert says Seoul will maintain a favorable relationship with Tokyo, largely because the two countries have the same issues to deal with.
Japan is not just a country that helps us keep countries like China and North Korea in check, but also a country like South Korea that is going through some overbearing behavior from the US, and therefore we need to work together in dealing with this.
All right, I guess we can see President Lee's pragmatic diplomacy right there. Thank you for the wrap-up, Ho-kyung. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
On the economic front, the country's economy remains weak due to a slowdown in the construction sector and deteriorating export conditions, driven by hikes in U.S. tariffs. Now, this is according to the latest assessment by a state-run think tank. Our Moon Ji-young has the details.
A state-run think tank has diagnosed that the South Korean economy remains subdued overall, noting escalating external uncertainties driven by U.S. tariff hikes. According to the June Economic Trends report released on Tuesday, the Korea Development Institute states that the country's economy is weighed down by continued weakness in the construction sector and a slowdown in exports. The agency stated that construction investment continued its decline, constraining recovery in domestic demand. Overall production growth is also slowing, with the construction sector notably contributing to this deceleration, posing a significant drag on the economy. Exports also showed weakening momentum, especially in sectors heavily exposed to U.S. tariff. This included a continued decline in exports to the U.S., with automobile shipments notably falling by 32% year-on-year. In contrast, manufacturing production maintained solid growth led by semiconductors, with persistent demand supporting robust growth in production, exports, and related equipment investment in this sector. Meanwhile, household and business sentiment showed modest improvement amid easing political uncertainties and progress in trade talks between Washington and Beijing. The Consumer Sentiment Index recovered to the baseline level in May, signaling an easing in the contraction seen since last year.
It seems the situation itself has improved compared to the first quarter. Since interest rate policy is now moving towards an easing stance, I think it might gradually contribute to an improvement in domestic demand.
However, the KDI warned that trade-related uncertainty remains high due to further increases in steel and aluminum tariff and concerns over a potential resurgence of U.S.-China trade tensions. 문지영, Arirang News.
South Korea's employment situation continues to struggle, but a glimpse of hope came as it saw the biggest addition of jobs in 13 months. This comes as certain sectors continue to do well and lead growth, while certain sectors that were not doing well are doing a bit better. Meanwhile, an aging society means workers are also getting older. Our Kim Do-yeon reports.
South Korea saw the largest increase in employment in 13 months, rising for a fifth consecutive month in May. According to Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of employed people aged 15 or older in May reached 29.16 million, up 245,000 compared to the same period last year. Though the trend had been an incline recently, it's also the first time in over a year the figure went past 200,000 mark. The same sectors continue to lead the incline, with the same sectors also seeing declines.
By industry, employment increased in sectors such as healthcare and social welfare services, professional, scientific and technical services, and finance and insurance. However, it declined year on year in sectors including agriculture, forestry and fisheries, construction and manufacturing.
In fact, the manufacturing sector saw a decline of 67,000 jobs on year, a smaller decline compared to past months, attributing to overall growth. On the other hand, the accommodation and restaurant industry saw, for the first time, a decline in employment in over a year. The number of employees in the industry dropped by 67,000 compared to a year ago, marking the first decline in 15 months. The decrease is the largest since November 2021, when COVID-19 was in full swing, with a drop of 86,000. However, there's hope as a supplementary budget is expected, with the new Lee Jae-myung administration and the ruling Democratic Party holding majority to support President Lee's motivation. Local currencies or universal cash distribution seem to be the options.
Providing payments in the form of local currency can help boost the regional economy. So we could see a temporary increase in spending, particularly in sectors like services, lodging, and dining, which may lead to a slight uptick in employment.
In the meantime, for the first time ever, South Korea's workforce aged 60 and over has surpassed 7 million. This comes as younger age groups, except those in their 30s, saw employment declines, with more seniors staying in the labor market amid a rapidly aging population. The overall employment rate for those 15 and older rose to 63.8%, up 0.3 percentage points from a year ago. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The Trump administration signaled its willingness to extend the pause on reciprocal tariffs for key trading partners that's set to expire on July 9th, but made it clear that it is not a necessity. Our Lee Soo-jin reports.
The U.S. may extend tariff breaks for countries pursuing trade negotiations in good faith. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, who is leading U.S. trade talks, said in a congressional hearing on Wednesday that the U.S. might extend the 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for certain countries. He mentioned that there are 18 important trading partners that the Trump administration is working towards reaching an agreement with. But President Donald Trump also told reporters on Wednesday that while he was willing to extend the 90-day pause, he did not believe that it would be necessary. He also revealed that the U.S. will send trade offer letters to dozens of countries within 2 weeks that they could either accept or decline. The 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs that were announced on April 9th is set to expire on July 9th. This has led South Korea's newly elected administration to prioritize reaching a trade agreement with the U.S., with President Lee Jae-myung expressing a shared commitment to a deal during his first call with President Trump. There are also expectations that the two leaders will continue discussions at next week's G7 summit in Canada. Bessent's remarks come after the U.S. announced that it had reached a framework agreement with China during a second high-level trade talks held in London. Those specific details have yet to be disclosed.
Dozens of countries have engaged the administration thus far with offers to improve their trade relations with the United States. This includes China. I have just returned in the middle of last night from successful negotiations in London with the Chinese delegation.
The Trump administration has so far announced a comprehensive agreement with the UK and a framework deal with China that serves as a stepping stone to eventually negotiate a full-fledged trade agreement. And as it remains a framework deal, Besant acknowledged that negotiations with China are likely to be a lengthy process, signaling that while key issues like Beijing's export controls on rare earths critical to advanced tech and defense were addressed, broader trade disputes remain. But active negotiations, not just with China, but other countries as well, are expected to continue, especially with the U.S. Federal Appeals Court ruling on Tuesday that the tariffs can remain in effect until the court completes its full legal review. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The World Bank has cut its global growth forecast for this year, citing the impact of escalating trade tensions. It now expects the global economy to grow just 2.3%, down 0.4 percentage points from its January forecast. The bank said this would mark the slowest pace since the 2008 financial crisis, apart from outright global recessions. By country, the U.S. is projected to grow 1.4% this year, nearly 1 point lower than earlier forecast, and half the pace of last year's 2.8%. China's outlook holds steady at 4.5%, while the Eurozone forecast was trimmed to 0.7%. Protests continued in Los Angeles against the Trump administration's nationwide crackdown on undocumented immigrants. Tensions appear to have eased slightly under a citywide curfew, but large-scale anti-Trump rallies are set to take place this weekend across the country. Our Pyongyang has this report.
Following the imposition of a nighttime curfew in key protest areas, the unrest in the City of Angels appears to be somewhat subsiding. LA Mayor Karen Bass ordered an 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew in downtown neighborhoods, with AP News reporting a notably quieter night and no visible presence of Marines or the National Guard. The measure, aimed at preventing looting and vandalism, led to over 200 arrests for violating dispersal orders or carrying weapons. Protests have since expanded to at least 24 cities nationwide, with mass arrests reported in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, and Denver. California Governor Gavin Newsom has strongly condemned President Trump's military deployment in Los Angeles.
This brazen abuse of power by a sitting president inflamed a combustible situation, putting our people, our officers, and even our National Guard at risk.
The governor has filed a lawsuit and emergency injunction to halt military patrols in LA, with the court hearing set for June 12th.
If court agrees, sanctuary states can refuse federal forces. The administration may appeal to the Supreme Court before the election. Other sanctuary states like New York or Illinois could do the same. At the same time, more conservative states might ask for federal help, so some cities could have troops and others won't.
A nationwide protest called the No Kings Movement is set for Saturday, coinciding with both Trump's birthday and a military parade marking the Army's 250th anniversary. According to AP News, organizers say it could be the largest single-day demonstration since Trump's return to office, with millions expected to rally across all 50 states. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
It's an exciting week for BTS fans as 4 members have completed their mandatory military service. All 7 members are set to finish their military service by the end of this month. 2 members, RM and V, were discharged on Tuesday, followed by Jimin and Jungkook on Wednesday. Jin and J-Hope finished their service last year. So all 7 members are set to finish their military service by the end of this month, as Suga, the last remaining member still serving in the military, is set to be discharged on June 21st. The Korean original musical Maybe Happy Ending swept the Tony Awards, the most prestigious musical theater awards in the United States, proving the strength of Korean musicals. Our Choi Soo-young reports on the factors behind its success.
On June 9th, in New York City, the Korean original musical Maybe Happy Ending became the star of the 78th Tony Awards. The musical won in 6 of the 10 categories it received nominations for, including Best Musical, Best Book of a Musical, and Best Original Score.
So many people worked hard with us for a long time. Seeing how happy they are now makes me feel incredibly proud. A lot of us poured our hearts into this project and gave it everything. That's one thing I can say with confidence.
Experts say the wins were significant as the musical succeeded without being a Hollywood-style blockbuster or based on a classic original story, both typical Broadway favorites.
Maybe Happy Ending isn't a typical Broadway show, it's not based on a classic story, nor is it a big-budget blockbuster. It's an original, unique, low-budget, and new way for a Korean musical, especially as it is set in a future Seoul. That's why its success is so meaningful. It took major honors like Best Musical, Best Direction, and Best Book, winning 6 Tonys.
The professor also noted that the musical's focus on the love between artificial intelligence robots reflects a philosophical advancement, adding significant value to its writing.
Hollywood usually focuses on AI and robots in terms of identity, like Am I Human? But maybe Happy Ending goes further by exploring love between AI robots, which is a more advanced philosophical theme. It blends universal emotions with Korean originality, creating a fresh musical model. By breaking away from familiar formulas, it showed that bold, emotional storytelling can succeed globally.
He stressed that what makes Korean content globally recognized is its deep cultural receptivity, not as a melting pot nor a salad bowl, but through a unique stage of fermentation.
1995 was the year Windows 95 launched, and soon after, Korea's high-speed internet network opened the door to global content, which today's creators grew up with. No other East Asian country absorbed global trends and universal values through content as freely as Korea did. Now, 30 years later, K-culture is in its fermentation stage and bursting out, creating something truly unique.
He said current hits are fine, but Korean content should focus on diversity rooted in humanism rather than simply following Western formulas for success. Choi Hyung, Arirang News.
That is all we have for this weekend. Thanks for watching.